Hey scholars, this is a lecture video for chapters 9 and 11 on organizing and outlining your speech. Make sure you have this PowerPoint available. Have the PowerPoint presentation open. It's available on the same module as you found the link for this video. So as I mentioned before in all the videos, I highly recommend that you are taking notes, that you're writing things down as you're going through the PowerPoint and as you're listening to the video. You can type directly into the notes section within the PowerPoint presentation or take notes in your book or however it is that you take notes. Everything that I say is intended to help you with preparing your speeches and preparing everything that you have to do for your speech. So some of the stuff that you'll hear in this lecture, some of the stuff that you'll see that you've already seen and have read in chapters 9 and 11. Some of that stuff you'll see is starting to be like overlap. You'll see a lot of things that overlap from chapter to chapter in this textbook and in this course because everything's working together. All the parts and pieces are working together to make one final product, which is your speech. Just like the building metaphor or cooking metaphor, so many different components of building in terms of tools and engineering and everything and all that kind of stuff. They all work together. They're all separate and they each have their own function in terms of tools, but they all work together. Same thing with food. So anyhow, this one's on organizing and outlining. So that slide 3, importance of organization. What's the point? Why do we do it? The audience is going to learn more, right? If your primary goal is to enlighten the audience for your informative speech, if your primary goal is to enlighten them, to ensure that they learn something about your topic, then the more organized that your speech is, the more they'll learn, the better the takeaway, right? Keep in mind that the audience is only going to take away so much from your speech. So they're going to have a few takeaways, right? So if you listened to a really well organized speech, you listened to a really good 5-minute speech and you learned a lot, you have good memory recall, you felt like you're really listening actively, and you felt satisfied, like you just felt like it was interesting to you and it's relevant to you, right? You listen to a speech like that, and I go up to you, later that day, and I said, hey, what are some of the takeaways you got from that speech, or what are some of the things that you learned? Chances are you're probably going to come up with a few, right? You're not going to be able to remember everything, but you could come up with a few things, some of the few key points, some of the few key takeaways from a speech. That's only if it was really well organized. If you listen to a speech that's really poorly organized and you're not following, you're not tracking, right? And then I go to you later that day and I say, hey, what'd you learn from that speech? You might kind of scratch your head and you're like, there's something about fireworks, something about the history of China, but I don't really know. So that's two extremes, right? So the more organized it is, the better the audience will be able to recall the information. If you have a very well organized speech, you can sort of foster, you can you can promote active listening. You can say things and do things in your speech that's going to systematically help students to pay more attention to what you're saying, or your audience to pay more attention to what you're saying. And then the more that you can make your topic relevant to the audience, the better. So keep in mind this organization stuff is after you've done all your research, after you've compiled all your research, you have all your facts, your articles, your books, you have all that kind of stuff. Now the question is, what do you do? How do you choose the main ideas? Slide 4, right? Um, Sometimes maybe you go to a supermarket and you're looking at, in this case, 340 types of sandwich bread. Like, how do you choose, right? Or you go to a store, you're going to make a dinner. If I said, hey, I want you to make a 3-course dinner and I want it to be sort of like an Italian food themed dinner, and then you go to the grocery store and you're looking at all these things, you're looking at so many vegetables and so many different types of ingredients that you can put into your dinner. Question is, what do you do? How do you choose which things to put in? Well, it's all going to be based on the theme for your speech or the theme for your dinner. If I'm a chef and I know exactly the kind of theme that you want, you tell me the theme you want for the dinner, you tell me the expectations you have. Well, now I'm going to go to the grocery store with a more systematic approach, right? With a speech, it's a little bit different. It's not as fun. You don't get to eat things. It's not as you're not cooking, but nevertheless, you're looking at all this information. How do I choose? Right? Maybe you have a list of 12 main ideas. You have 12 main potential main points, and you're like, man, I want to talk about all of them, but you can only talk about a few of them. There's no magic number for main points, but the rule of thumb: 3 main points for an informative speech. 3 main points. Once in a while, I'll hear a speech with 2, but it's extremely rare. And chances are, if you only have 2 main points, if you're looking at all your information and you're thinking, I only have 2 main points, well, maybe that would be okay, or maybe you need to do some more research. You need to add more, or one of your main points is too compact that you can actually take 1 main point and divide that up into 2 main points. Nevertheless, an easy answer to this is choose what's interesting to you. Choose what you think the audience would want to know. If the goal is to provide information that's novel, that's enlightening to the audience, well, what types of things, of all the information that you found, narrow it down to a top 3, or maybe you go from, you have a top 12, you're like, man, I have 12, I have 10. Well, go from a process of elimination. Which ones am I willing to eliminate? If you looked at 10 main ideas, 10 main points that have to do with your topic, you're giving a speech on a person, you want to talk about that person's major achievements, and you have 10 of them. You're like, man, each one of these major achievements is independent. They're all unique and they're all great. You can't talk about all of them in detail. So you might need to restructure them or reorganize them, or you basically just say, like, hey, of all these 10, which ones am I willing to part with? So then you just take a pencil or pen and you just cross them out. Which ones am I willing to separate from? Cross those out, and then you go from 10 to 7, you go from 7 to 4, and then from 4 you go to 3, or something like that. Whatever method works best for you. But keep in mind, it's your speech, you're in control, you're the one doing the research, so it's up to you to determine which ones to focus on, which main ideas that you want your audience to learn about. There's no one correct way of doing this, but choose wisely. And the authors provide a lot of good information on how to do that. On to slide 5, the characteristics of the main ideas. Understanding how they should be characterized might also help you with determining which ones to include. Anyhow, they should be characterized by simplicity, distinction, parallel structure, balance, and coherence. So simplicity is basically that. Keep it simple. So I have that acronym, KISS, KISS. Some people understand that as keep it simple, Sally, or keep it simple, stupid, or there's a variety of ways to understand that. The bottom line is it's an acronym that kind of helps you to memorize something, or to recall something. But keep it simple. That doesn't mean simplistic. So for those of you who are into words and whatnot, simplistic is very different from simple. You could have very complex ideas, but they can be stated and explained in a way that's simple. It's easy to understand, right? Keep it simple. They should be distinct. Each main point should be distinct. In other words, if I looked at your main points and I said main point 1 and main point 2 are so similar such that you could combine them. You don't need to have a distinct main point. If you're looking at your main points and you're like, okay, maybe you have 4 main points. Maybe you're working with 5 or 6, having more and then whittling down, right? You have more and then you just take away. And I look at, hey, well, main point 2 and main point 4, look at these 2 main points. They're very, very similar. There's no need to have 2 separate main points when you're talking about pretty much the same thing. In other words, they're not distinct. Each main point should be distinct and discrete. The information in main point 3 should be completely different from the information in main point 2 and main point 1, and so on and so forth. They all are related to the specific purpose statement. They're all related to your topic, but each main point is unique on its own. So again, with the building metaphor, if I was talking about a house and blueprints, well, one main goal or one main element of a blueprint or main element of building a house is, let's say, electrical. You have electrical. So everything that has to do with electrical is electrical. And you have plumbing. And then you have, flooring. And then you have painting, right? each one of those things is its own separate component, but they're all related to building the house. They're all part of the house. Um, you know, if you fail to include the part of painting, and it's like your house is finished, right? Everything looks great, but you failed to include painting. It's like, well, it'd be kind of strange to live in a house if it didn't have painting in it. So that's a major component, and it's distinct. It's distinct from the roof. It's distinct from hardware fixtures, right? All that kind of stuff. But anyways, that parallel structure is basically using the same pattern of wording. The same pattern of wording for each sentence, just the way that you phrase it within the outline, and also the way that you might start it in the actual speech. I've already talked about this, and I have some examples to illustrate this. It's pretty basic. And then balance is kind of the I already talked about balance before. In other words, how much time are you going to devote to each main point? If you have three main points, if you have a 5-minute speech and there's three main points, well, roughly each main point is going to take about a minute of time, about a minute of speaking time. On paper, it might look a little bit different. If you have an outline and main point 1 is a page and a half, and main point 2 is a little teeny tiny paragraph, and then main point 3 is a few paragraphs, well, that's imbalanced. That's not balanced. You need to have balance. It doesn't have to be exact. It's not like if your main points comprise, let's say, 1,000 words. I mean, it probably wouldn't. That's a lot of words. But if it comprised 1,000 words, it's not like you have to have exactly 1/3 for main point 1, exactly 1/3 for main point 2, and so on and so forth. There should be a logical balance between main points 1, 2, and 3, or however many you have. And what you might find like you might have only 2 main points, and you're like, man, I'm spending most of my time on main point 1 and not that much time on main point 2. That might be sort of a red flag, or sort of an indication that maybe main point 1 is either 1, too long, too much information, or like I said earlier, main point 1, actually, when you take a closer look at it, you're looking at main point 1, you realize that actually should be 2 main points. So you might just need to do some modification. So you'll probably see that, you know, hopefully what you'll see, and which is a normal part of outlining and organizing your speech, you're making lots and lots of revisions, right? You're building something. You like that doesn't work here. Copy paste, cut paste, et cetera, et cetera. You're shuffling things around to fit this nice pattern of a very organized an organized way of communicating your ideas. So that's balance. Coherence is just need to make sense, right? If it's not coherent, if it's incoherent, if I'm listening to you if I'm listening to you go over main point 3, and I'm like, man, I have no idea what you're talking about. If I'm reading in your outline and I'm hearing it in your speech and I'm thinking, I don't really know what you're saying, that's a bad thing, right? You might know what you're saying, but if the audience doesn't know what you're saying, then that's a problem. So make sure it's coherent, that's understandable. That's why it's a good idea to always, like, you know, get a second opinion, or get an opinion of what people think. In other words, as you're working on your speech, hey, talk to people, talk to your friends, your family members, your roommates, or your coworkers, your bosses. Hey, I have the speech idea. Can you give me some feedback? I mean, I'm serious. I really, really encourage you to do that. It might feel kind of weird. It might feel uncomfortable. And I'm not saying, hey, you should do this because it's comfortable. And I'm also not saying you should do it because it's uncomfortable. I'm saying you should do that because it's useful. I rarely ever do things that are not useful. I'm a very practical person, very logical and whatnot. So it's useful to get feedback. I once was given a speech on, when I was in my public speaking class back in college. I gave a speech on, it was a persuasive speech on why people should visit the restaurant that I worked at the time. And I got that approval from my teacher and whatnot. But anyways, I thought, hey, what if I got my manager's feedback? So one night at work, after my shift, I went to my manager and I said, and I told him what I was doing, what kind of speech I was doing, and he's like, "Oh, cool! Like, you're gonna give a speech on trying to get people to come to this restaurant." So he was, you know, he was biased, but he gave me really good feedback. In other words, I said, "Hey, can I practice my speech? Can you just sit there and let me practice my speech?" And he said, "Sure." So as he was eating dinner, he let me practice my speech, and he gave me excellent feedback. In terms of ideas, coherence, and if it made sense, and he told me some things to consider, etc. So that's that. Getting feedback is good. So the authors talk about arranging your main ideas, like how to put everything together. It says factors affecting arrangement. This is on page 194, chapter 9, if you're following along. So they say, are the main ideas dependent? Are they independent? Are they unfamiliar? Should your strongest idea come first or last? And there's so many different ways to come up with that. There's no one correct way. There's lots of incorrect ways. There's lots of incompetent ways to present your ideas. In other words, if it doesn't make sense, if I can't follow along, that's bad. But in terms of, if you have your three main points, if your arrangement is topical, categorical, in other words, it's not chronological. It doesn't matter if you have three main points. It doesn't matter if you have point 3 go first or point 3 go last if it's categorical. But the question is, well, what do I want my audience to learn about first? What do I want them to audience? What do I want the audience to learn about last, etc. So primacy effect and recency effect has to do with the idea that primacy effect it's a tendency for what's presented, for what is presented first to be best remembered, and recency effect is the opposite. So it's kind of like in a conversation. If I'm having a conversation with you about, let's say, what I did over the weekend, whether it's a 1-minute conversation or a 5-minute conversation, primacy effect suggests that you'll remember best what I say in the beginning of my story, and then recency effect is the idea that you remember best what I say at the end of my story. And I guess both of those things can be true, right? You remember really well what I said at the beginning and the end, or you only remember what I said at the beginning, or you only remember what I said at the end. It's just that it's just a different way. It's a different strategy of how to present information. If you're really confused with this, or if you're not sure what to present first, don't worry about it so much right now. You might actually practice your speech with, one option is the way you currently have it, main points 1, 2, and 3. This is the order I'm doing it. And then after you practice it a few times, you realize, you know what, I'm gonna kind of shuffle some things. I'm gonna rearrange some things. I actually think main point 3 would be best if I presented that first, and then main point 1 I actually have in the middle, and main point 2 actually is at the end. Doesn't matter to me as long as it makes sense to you, and then obviously it has to make sense to the audience. So if you're thinking, if you're at that point where like, how do I put all this stuff together, review this section on the arranging main ideas, and that should help. The idea, the most important thing is put thought, right? Put thought into the way that you're arranging the main ideas. It shouldn't be flippant. It shouldn't be arbitrary. There should be a rhyme and reason as to why you're arranging things the way you are. Is your speech. Again, with the cooking thing. If I'm cooking something, there's generally a reason why I make things the way I make things. I make a dish. You say it tastes good, and I'm thinking I could have made that same dish 5 different ways. At the end of the day, you would have still said, okay, that still tastes good. If you don't know anything about cooking, all you really care about is, does it taste good? And if the answer is yes, then it doesn't really matter how I organize it, as long as I organize it and I arrange things and I have a method that makes sense. There's a logical, rational reason as to why I cook things the way I do. But you, the audience member, or you, the taster, is all you care about is it tastes good. For a speech, as an audience member, the main thing I care about is, does it make sense to me? Can I follow what you're saying? Do I get a takeaway? In terms of how you arrange that, that's up to you. You're the expert on your topic. You're gonna know way more about your topic than anyone else. So choose wisely in terms of how to arrange everything. The patterns, I already talked about the patterns at slide 7: chronological, topical, categorical, problem solution, and then Monroe's motivated sequence. For your persuasive speeches, everyone's basically going to be doing the same thing. Everyone's going to be doing a problem solution speech. For your informative speeches, for the most part, you will either choose chronological or topical. Topical, categorical is the same difference. The authors provide some examples of this. I have some examples in this PowerPoint presentation as well in terms of the differences. If I was talking about the major achievements, if my speech was on a person and I talked about the major achievements of their life, I could go chronological for, when they first got out of college, if it's a athlete, when they first joined the NBA, when they first joined whatever the sports team was, this is their first major achievement and their second major achievement and their third major achievement. It could be chronological, or it might be more categorical. The greatest achievement that they made in as an athlete was this. Outside of the court, their greatest achievement was this. Maybe it's some philanthropic thing, or maybe they wrote a book, right? Totally different way of doing things. But it's up to you how you want to do that, as long as it makes sense, right? Chronological, the key is if it's chronological, that means that it matters. The order of main points 1, 2, 3, that matters. Like baking a cake, I give you a step by step process with baking a cake. If my last step is turn the oven on, right? Turn the oven on is step one, or step one is buy the ingredients, right? But at some point, far long before I put the cake in the oven, I turn the oven on. But if my last step is turn the oven on to 350, well, technically that's not going to work out so well, right? Because if you're following my recipe step by step, by the time I get to the last step, if it says turn the oven on, it's like, well, the cake's already been in there for 40 minutes, and now I'm turning the oven on. Now I don't have a cake. I don't have anything. It doesn't make sense. Hopefully that makes sense. So here's some examples on different types of patterns, slides 8, 9, and 10 and 11. So to inform my audience how the Great Wall of China was built, it was built in 3 major stages. Hopefully you can identify what type of pattern is this. So like, what is this? Question. Chronological. The next one, the major kinds of fireworks. If that was your topic, you have to determine chronological or topical. Which would it be? Hopefully you chose topical, categorical. In other words, it doesn't matter if this example on slide 9, if I do skyrockets, pinwheels, lances, and then Roman candles, that's fine, right? But if it's the Great Wall of China and I talked about the last phase, the last stage of when it was built as my first main point, well, now it doesn't really make sense, right? That doesn't make sense for the purpose of the speech, to inform my audience about the process, or the overall, all the different phases of how the Great Wall of China was built. And then the slides 10 and 11 is topical, and slide 11 is something you've seen before in a previous PowerPoint, but this is also illustrating parallel structure, right? It's a major achievements of a person, and the way that each main point starts is the same. As a teacher, as a journalist, as a civic organizer, right? Parallel structure. So it's the same. What's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of a specific word. Anyhow, but you're beginning each sentence in the same way. Specifically, the actual words as a, and then that third word is a specific role of that person, right? It's also about her achievements, but that specific pattern is as a teacher, as a journalist, as a civic organizer, as a mother, as an athlete, as an author, right? So there's a variety of ways you can do that. That's parallel structure. It's kind of similar to alliteration. It makes it easier for you, the writer of the speech, the creator of the speech. It makes it much easier to write it, to begin each main point the same way, and then easier for the audience to follow along as well. That could be topical or chronological, right? If you're talking about the major achievements for someone, you could use parallel structure, you could use chronological or topical, as I already mentioned. Transitions are important. We've already talked about transitions. They're in another chapter. I think it was chapter 10, but just as a refresher, what is a transition? When I ask these questions on the videos and when you see them on the PowerPoint, the idea is that you actually try to answer them. So answer them out loud or answer them in your head. But the idea is that you answer them to engage with this material information. So transitions are phrases that tell the audience when you're moving from one idea to another. It's a way for the audience to know that you're finished with main point 1 and you're moving on to main point 2. Of course, it's verbal. You're going to have it. You're actually going to state it. You're not going to say my transition is. Rather, you're going to finish one thought, and then you're actually going to say something like, excuse me, you're going to say something along the lines of, now that I'm done with main point one, I'm moving on to main point two. You're not going to use those words, but that's essentially the goal. That's what you're accomplishing, is you're letting your audience that you're letting your audience know that you're moving from one point to another point. Sounds so basic, sounds so easy. The reason why I emphasize this so much is because over the years, and keep in mind, I've been doing this for 15 years. So often I'll listen to a speech with no transitions. It's very difficult to follow. It's extremely challenging to follow a speech when there's no transitions. I don't know when you're moving from one point to the next, so it's harder to follow, especially for the person grading your speech. So my advice to you, make sure you use these for a variety of reasons. One, they're required as part of your grade. Not having them is going to impact your grade negatively. Also, not having them is going to make your speech less organized, more difficult to follow for me, the grader, and then for the general audience, assuming that your audience is a group of college students. You can also have nonverbal transitions in addition to verbal transition, where you have a pause. You should always have a pause, a slight pause. Like there should be one way to think about a speech is that a speech is not just this one long-winded breath where you're just one continuous thought. Rather, it's intro, body, conclusion. You get her attention, you introduce your topic, you have a preview, and then pause. That right there was about a 2 to 3 second pause. All you need is about a 2-second pause. Pausing for 2 seconds can feel like a long time because the spotlight's on you, the camera's on you, people are looking at you, whatever the context is. You're in a boardroom, you're in a conference room, you're at a job interview, whatever context it is in terms of when you're presenting information, when you're giving a public speech, when you're giving a presentation. It's imperative to use pauses strategically. When you pause, it allows the audience, it's almost like a wake-up call. It's a sign to the audience. Okay, one, they either lost their place, and maybe you're thinking that. That's what I'm thinking when someone pauses. Or they're pausing on purpose because they're moving from one point to the next point, or they're looking at their notes. But as for a very a tightly knit package of 5-minute speech, use pauses strategically. Introduction, get our attention, introduce your topic, preview, pause. Main point one, right? Then you go over main point one, pause. Transition. Transition is a statement that's letting the audience know, now I'm done with main point one, and now moving on to main point two. Pause. And then you have main point two. Pause. Transition. Pause. Main point three. Pause. Transition. Pause. Conclusion. It's so simple, and it's not something that takes a long time, but you have to do that. Facial expressions, physical movement. There's a variety of ways that you can also indicate that you're moving from one point to the next. Change in the tone of your voice, and this is something that we naturally do. I've talked about this before, where going from conversational speaking, your whole life you've been conversational speaking, and many of you have engaged in formal speaking, but nevertheless, when we're moving from one thought to another, we sort of automatically just do things non-verbally that tells the audience, that tells the people I'm talking to, whether it's my kids, my wife, my friends, whomever. There's things that I do with facial expressions, with tone of voice, with volume, the rate of speech, all those different types of things lets you know that I'm finishing up with a thought, right? You're in a conversation, right? You're in a group of, oftentimes you probably talk in groups of people, and you have something to say, right? There's something I want to say or ask a question or make a comment. So instead of interrupting someone, I'm going to kind of wait till I can kind of like know when to interject. When should I make this comment? And I can just tell, right? I can tell you the formula for that, but you just know instinctively because you've been doing it your whole life since you were born. I use this analogy sometimes. It's kind of silly, but when you're thinking of like hopscotch, like or double dutch or whatever it's called, like the jump rope. You got 2 jump ropes going. I was never good at that, right? You got 2 jump ropes going, and you got someone who's like they're like trying to see, when should I jump in? When should I jump in? And it's just like instinctive. I just know based on how I feel, based on how the ropes look. It's just like I just know. And if you've done double dutch a lot, then you know exactly when to jump in. And if you jump in the wrong time, you get hit, right? Or the rope hits your foot or your head or something like that. So hopefully that analogy kind of gets you the idea of um, gets you to understand the idea of transitioning from one thing to the next. Like how do you know when someone's stopping? Anyhow, that is that is a variety of ways to use transitions. So here's some examples. 14. Now that I've explained the nature of the floor exercises, I'll now elaborate on the powerful vault features. Okay, so from that transition, hopefully you look at that first transition, and if I said, hey, what was their previous main point, and what's their next main point? If I asked you those two questions, I hope you can answer them, and I hope your answers would be, well, their previous main point was floor exercises. So you can assume that their previous main point, perhaps each supporting point, big A, big B, big C, big D, each one of those subpoints was all about a floor exercise, right? And the next main point is going to be all about, you guessed it, vault features. This seems so easy, and it is so easy. But if you don't type them out, if you don't write them out and you don't practice them, you don't include them on your index card, you don't put them on your outline, then they're not going to happen. And it's going to definitely impact your grade, and it's going to affect the way that you present the speech. It'll affect the way that I hear the speech. When you do include them, it makes your speech experience that much more smooth. It really demystifies the speech. And I'm not just like having to memorize this long thing. It's just like little chunks of information. It's chunks of information, and I'm pausing, catch my breath, right, to regain my composure, and then have these transitional statements. That's kind of giving me a break, right? It's a way to like, all right, I'm done with that exercise and moving on to the next. It's like a little like rest period. If you do exercise, or you're in fitness classes, or you play sports, you might have a lineup. Hey, we got a 15-minute workout. You can do 3 minutes here, pause for a minute, 3 minutes here, rest for a minute. And in that resting time, is you're using that time wisely. You're drinking water, you're breathing, you're whatever, right? It's not a 15-minute workout nonstop. It's chunks of time, right? With breaks. The speech is the same way, and those in between moments, that's the transitions. Hopefully that helps. Now on to outlining. Sorry, that last part is selecting, arranging your supporting materials. So this is about and I already talked about supporting materials. You have all your information, right? What do you do with it? Well, after you've gone through your journal articles, your magazine articles, newspaper articles, your books, all the different sources that you have, how do I choose, right? There's so much information from this book. There's so much information from this article. How do I choose? Well, have a variety. It's best to have a variety, right? Maybe you did an interview. You interviewed someone, and you're going to use that. You're going to use information from that interview for various parts of your speech. You're going to have a book. You read probably not the entire book. If you had a 300-page book, you don't need to read the entire 300-page book, but you need to read enough of that book such that it's enough to inform you to strategically present the information in your speech. And how you're going to use that book, it's up to you. You got to figure out what works best. But like I said, the bulk of the work is in the research, and that's why I spent so much time on the research. And I spent a lot of time on a lot of things in here, because this class is very different from other types of courses that I teach or that you've taken before. It's a public speaking class. It's performance, but a lot of it's research. It's all technique, etc. So on to slide 16, which is chapter 11. That's outlining, and I've already used this metaphor quite a bit. But outlining, just think of a blueprint, right? You're looking at a blueprint, and the blueprint is a guide to build something. And when you're all done with the building, it's a finished product, right? The blueprint tells you everything that you need to do. It has lots of information. The term is preparation outline. That might be a new term for you. Preparation outline is basically a very detailed, a full content outline. It's not your entire speech word for word, but it's like the blueprint, right? You have all the information you need, all the specs, all the things that you need to know on a blueprint in terms of elevation and depth. And if there's a grade, if there's a grade from one point of the property to another part of the property, other part of the property. In other words, is there a slope? Is it higher on one end of the structure than the other end of the structure? If so, we need to account for that, and I make notes on that. So in an outline, you have all the information. You have your main points, your sub points, your sub points, your sub points if those exist, if you need them. You have your source citations, you have your transitions, you label things, right? You're making everything really clear to where like anybody could look at your outline, and even if someone who's never had a public speaking class, they've never read this book, they should be able to look at your outline and be able to follow along with it and know and be able to like tell you like, well, I'm not familiar with this, but obviously this is the introduction, this is the transition, and these are your sources. Cool. All right, I can follow along. It's all the information. Why do you need one anyways? It keeps you organized. So the outline is what keeps you organized, keeps you on track for time. It ensures balance. It helps with the flow. So in the previous chapter, I was talking about all the ideas and information, and now you're actually putting it into an actual outline where you're typing things. So it's best to begin with a skeleton outline to where you just, if you want to have some sort of semblance of progress, hey, open up a Word document, create a brand new Word document and title it Informative Speech. And you just type introduction. You can put everything in there, put the labels, introduction, and then Roman numeral 1, type me. Roman numeral 2, type me. Roman numeral 3, type me. In other words, you're going to go back and you're going to type information. That's what I would do when I would work on research projects with people. I'd be creating skeleton outlines or skeleton essays with different pieces and parts, and knowing that I'll go back and fill it in. All right, transition 1, main point 1. Main point 1 is ... and then Roman numeral A, Roman numeral B, Roman numeral C, so on and so forth. So you can set up a skeleton outline that way, and then go back and then plug in information accordingly. In other words, I have one document on my computer with it's my working outline. It's going to be my final outline, but I don't have any information in there yet. So I have that information, and now I'm looking at all my sources, which might be on Post-it notes, sticky notes. I might have stuff written in my books. I might have a running just like a bunch of notes, a bunch of information on a separate document, and now I'm like copying and pasting and adding to things. Right? That's what you do. You're building the outline. So on to slide 19. Like I already said, you want to list everything, label everything, use a consistent pattern of all that kind of stuff. Make it very clear what each component of the outline is. That slide 20, like I said, include your transitions, label them, attach a bibliography. I already talked about that. Meaning you'll have a separate assignment. That's your annotated bibliography research assignment. That's a separate assignment. Nevertheless, for your outline, you still need to attach a bibliography and give your speech a title. The title is not super important, and I would say wait till the very end to give your speech a title if you're not sure. I don't grade you on the creativity of your title. It's just something you want to do. So I had that rule of thumb for the visual framework on slide 21. Rule of thumb is for each main point you have, you should have at least 2 subpoints. In other words, if you have a main point, if you're looking at all your information and you think it's important enough, if you're looking at all your data, you're looking at all your supporting material, and you're thinking, okay, I got an idea for a main point. Whatever your main point is, you should be able to find at least 2 subpoints, at least a Roman numeral A and a Roman numeral B. But probably more than that, right? Probably A, B, and C, but at minimum 2. And then for sub-subpoints, right? So subpoint A is whatever, right? Subpoint B is whatever, but I'm gonna add another subpoint within B, right? That's your sub-subpoint. Everything that falls below a main point is a supporting point. So everything is a supporting point. So A, big A, little 1, little 2, little a, little b, and then the little I and 2 little i's. It's not imperative that you use this exact method, Roman numeral A and then 1 and then little a and then little I. You don't have to use that exact formula. That's the standard, like the traditional Roman numeral type of an outline. In my opinion, it's the easiest because it's been around forever. Why is this a rule of thumb? What's the logic behind it? If I'm gonna have a subpoint, let's say main point 2, subpoint A, and then subpoint 1. If I'm like, if all I can come up with is that one subpoint, that little one right there, if I can't find any other information that's supporting that big A, then it's probably not that important, right? Or it's not important enough to include in my outline. So if you have a 1, you should have a 2. If you have an A, you should have a B. If you have a little a, you should have a little b. If you have a little I, you should have 2 little i's. So that's the rule of thumb, at least 2. But ideally, what I see in most outlines is for the rule of thumb, for most of the time, it's like 2 or 3, right? 2, 3, or 4 for each one. The cheeseburger, hopefully that kind of helps you visualize the outline. Slide 23. You start with a working outline. You have all your ideas. You just whatever's out there, you just get it out there, and then your preparation outline. That's the thing that you turn in. That's the thing that's worth points. And then your presentation outline is just for you. I won't have it at all. I won't see your presentation outline necessarily. I will see your index card. As I mentioned, the process for your index card is such that before you begin your speech, you're going to take your index card, put it up to the camera, front and back, and then that way I can see what's on there. But my point is it's for your benefit. And the authors give you information on a presentation outline or a working outline. They give you information on both. So a working outline might look something like this, right? Slide 24. You might just have all these ideas and they're all over the place. When I was a grad student, when I was a graduate student, this is more along the lines of what I would do. In other words, when I was working on something, I would literally, I'd have my books open, I'd have my sources open, I'd have the articles open, I'd have ideas, and I'd scatter them on the floor. I'd arrange them on the floor, and literally just kind of like take a step back and look at everything to have a sort of a visual picture, like see the big picture, or post-it notes on your desk, or on the ceiling, on the wall. Put it on the ceiling too. But you have all this information, right? And you're like, how does this all fit together, right? Everything I'm looking at, it's an outcome of things I've read and I've written notes on them. Maybe it's post-it notes, maybe it's your computer, whatever works best for you. And then I take that information and I put it into the preparation outline, which is the full content, outline that you're turning in for points. And then once that's finished, once you're done with your preparation outline, it's like, dang, that's all the work. You're done. Now you just have to practice your speaking. You got to practice your speech. That's the easy part. The easy part is practicing your speech. And now you have your presentation outline. So that's the stuff that you write on your index card. Slide 27 right there. Index cards, like I said, you're only allowed to have one. You can have I allow you to have a 4x6 or 5x8. So like one card, right? You can use a 3x5 card, but the reason why I suggest 4x6 or 5x8 is because that's a lot bigger, and you can fit more information onto a 4x6 or 5x8. A 3x5 card has 15 square inches of writing on one side, and if it's front and back, then it's 30 square inches of writing, right? That's one way to think about it. A 4x6 card has 24 square inches of writing, front and back. That's 48. That's almost twice as much as a 3x5 card. And a 5x8, do the math if you want. The point is, the idea is not to have as much information on there as possible. The idea is to only include information on the index card that is really important. So write things like slow down, smile, look up. As I mentioned in other videos, you can use a variety of colors. You might use different colored pens or markers or highlighters or whatever it's going to do to help you out, to help you with memorizing things. Organize the card. And keep in mind that you should have a few versions of the card, a few drafts of the card. So, or maybe initially you have several cards, and then from those several cards, you whittle it down, you narrow it down to the point to where you only have one card. with only information that is absolutely necessary to start on there. It should not be word for word. It should just be phrases. It should be um, look. I mean, you can look at the examples that the audience. I mean, that the what's it called? Authors. The authors provide all these examples of working outlines, what that looks like, or the presentation. Sorry, the presentation outline. They still use like the Roman numerals and the big A, big B, and so on and so forth, but it's just like a word, a phrase. Is very, very, very basic. So it's as little as information as possible. And then you saw that example on pages 244, 245, where they say reference to supporting materials on your speaking outline or presentation outline. Quote from Dion book, on campus interviews. In other words, you don't need to write the entire reference unless you need to. But if you know your material really well, if you know your sources really well, keep in mind you only have 4 sources for your informative speech. You should know those sources really well. You should know the authors. You should know the work itself. If there's only 4, by the time that you give your speech, if I took your index card away and you were right about to begin your speech, if I said, hey, all right, tell me about your sources, you definitely should be able to tell me about your sources. In other words, what it is, what the source is, what information is in there, who the authors are, etc. Because if you can't tell me that, then chances are you don't know your material that well. You don't have to have it memorized to a T. Maybe there's 6 authors from a book, or authors with very difficult last names, or like the title of a journal is a very, very long title of a journal. You don't have to memorize that stuff, but you should know what the content is. You should know what's in there, because like I said, most of the work for this class is on the research and reading your sources. So some tips for an effective outline using the Roman numerals, indentations, full sentences, keep it balanced, all that kind of stuff. You're still gonna outline your introduction and conclusion, and it's the same thing. Attention getter, give your audience a reason to listen. The preview statement, the conclusion. I gave you some examples of what a supporting point, like the difference between a sub point and a sub point, and so on and so forth with the Titanic. You see on slide 32 what that looks like. So in your actual speech, subpoint A, the Titanic hit disaster head on when it ran into an iceberg 4 days after its departure. In your actual speech, that might be word for word, right? Or it might be a different version of that. You might elaborate a little bit. Your actual speech is not an exact replica of your outline. It is to an extent in terms of a house is not an exact replica of a blueprint, but in some ways it is, because the house is the blueprint, right? The house is the outcome of the blueprint. And in some parts of you, if you look at a house and you look at the blueprint, you're like, oh wow, this looks really, really similar. They're all interrelated. So that's that. So hopefully these examples really help you with clarifying things and enhancing things. The conclusion, you're still going to have an outline for the conclusion, or you have a summary statement, a call to action. The authors mentioned about these like call to actions. That's only for persuasive speech. For an informative speech, you're still going to have a section where you're synthesizing, summarizing things, and then of course providing closure, providing final thoughts. Okay, that's a lot of information. I know that was really, really comprehensive and thorough, but again, my whole point is to in these videos is to give you as much information as possible to help you with crafting your speeches. So you should be, in theory, you should be working on your speeches as you're listening to these PowerPoint lectures and the videos. It's different than just going to a class and taking notes and then going home and then working on something. Part of my philosophy, or part of my idea, at least for this online teaching component, is that you're listening to the stuff and then you're actually working on stuff. So you might actually spend for certain sessions, you might sit down and you might spend a few hours from going through the PowerPoint, listening to my video, and then working on your own stuff, right? You might be pausing things as you're listening to me. The whole point is that I'm basically telling you, explaining to you how to do your work as thoroughly as possible. So there's lots of examples of speech outlines on our course page, and then you can go online and find examples as well. Hope you're all doing well. I'll talk to you later. Bye.